Hello and welcome to the Ken McElroy Show. I'm your host, Danille, here with Leslie.
Hi, Danille. How are you?
Great. So Ken couldn't join us today. He is traveling to Belize to speak at the Real Estate Guys Conference. We are all exhausted because we just went through a weekend of Limitless.
It was amazing.
It was amazing. Thank you for those that attended. For those that missed out because we sold out, we will be hosting the same event next June. It was amazing. Amazing speakers, amazing event.
You know, if people are able to brave the heat of Arizona in June,
Yep.
They are committed.
Absolutely. And it was extra hot this year, but we still had so much fun. And, we had speaker dinners. We had Mark Victor Hansen speak, Beardy Brandon speak. So many
Kim
people.
Kiyosaki. So well-rounded. Dr. Rada. And oh my gosh, health, wellness, financial, the whole thing.
Yes. And also it was more, also meeting the members. Like that was really fun for me because I see you guys on YouTube all the time. You're always commenting, and to be like, I'm Sarah, I'm Jing. I'm like, oh my gosh, hi. Because I feel like I've talked to you every week, and then to meet you in person was just awesome.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
I met a gal named May, and she was just over the moon about the education she's gotten. She brought her two little pups with her. Was adorable.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And it's just really fun. It was fun to just hear everyone's stories. We had everyone there from beginners that don't own any real estate yet to people that have a very large portfolio. So it was just, and what I loved about it was a lot of the members were connecting, right? So it was like, I'm looking to get involved in mobile homes. And I'm like, oh, there's a guy here that was on our channel about mobile homes. This is his name because we all name badges on. Go ahead and look for him. Or, just members connecting together, doing deals and.
For sure. Yeah, and all the resources there with the expo. I mean, so many great people in one space. So I got a lot of great feedback, and we had so much fun at our booth. Thanks for having us.
Oh, of course. Yeah, it was awesome. So if you guys next year, you're going to have to check it out. Ken had a blast, although we were just so exhausted yesterday. We could barely move, but it was really, really fun. So today we're going to be chatting about inflation. So the new CPI numbers come out on Wednesday, but they are saying they might increase it up to 0.75. Ken thinks they're bluffing and they're just going to do 0.5.
Interest rates?
Yeah, interest rates. Oh, yeah, interest rates.
Yes.
See, I can't even think today.
No, it's... Hey, give you a break, man. You needed the rest. But those interest rates are going to continue to ratchet up. We got to watch that closely.
Yes, for sure. And make sure you guys hit the like button. I love that. As you know, it really helps me out. But yeah, so the inflation numbers came out last month, and we were supposed to peak it in May, right? And then the June inflation numbers come out, and they're actually even higher at 8.6%.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the highest inflation we've seen in 40 years. And the CPI is supposed to be, the inflation that people feel, right? It's their groceries, it's their gas, it's all the things that are going up. However, if you look at it, they definitely are adjusting the numbers because grocery costs, mine have went up from about $80 a week to $160 a week, and that's 100% increase. Okay. So it's not a 8.6 increase for me. And gas has went up about 100%. If you look at it, we're almost at $6 a gallon here in Phoenix. And I remember when it was about $3 a gallon, not that long ago.
Well, yeah. And the consumer price index, it really is measuring where that people are still spending money, even though inflation's up 8.6%. And you're right. It's up.
Yeah.
Month over month, those projections are up. And so there's got to be some kind of easing.
Right. And rents are up, obviously, 30% about in Phoenix. And I think across the country, it said the national average was around 7%, but a lot of markets are a lot higher than that.
There's no question. A lot of the in-migration that's come into a lot of the cities, it's really forced those rates up. There's a big lack of supply, so that's part of it. People willing to spend more as well.
Well, and I wanted you to touch on that because what we hear a lot on the channel is that rents can't keep going up because people can't afford for rents to keep going up. And what I find interesting is, a lot of people say, we're going to have another 2008. And a lot of people comment, rents are going to go down, housing prices are going to go down, but rents didn't go down in 2008. I don't think a lot of people know that.
They didn't. We saw a little easing. Really, what it's about in multifamily is about the lack of acceleration. It slows. Mm-hmm. So the kind of increases that we've had, you're not bound to continue to see those for years and years. Mm-hmm. I think folks who have just entered into real estate, or even over the last, we're in a 15, 20 year recovery.
Right.
So those cycles, I'll tell you, if you haven't seen one or been in one, it can be really easy. Or if you've been in it and have forgotten, because people have a short-term memory when it comes to that, is that, really what we're going to see is a slowing of the increase of rents. And, there have been times during the last recession where we did see a little bit of reduction, depending on where you were, mm-hmm. reduction in rent, meaning, some gain to lease situations where your existing renters are paying more than the new folks coming in. Well, they stand and take notice. You got to really be ready to pivot when that happens. In the case now, I think it's just going to be more of a slowing mm-hmm. of rent increases. So if someone bought a property hoping that it would continue to appreciate like it has, they're going to have more trouble. But for those who've been through the cycles, they'll know that they're not. It's not going to continue to go up like it has.
Right, and that's kind of why Ken and I teach, and you teach as well, that you want to buy for cash flow, right? So where people get in trouble is they buy on projected cash flow. Mm-hmm. So they say, okay, but these rents are here now, and I'm not going to do anything, but the rent's just going to go up. So eventually I'm going to get some cash flow. Mm. And that's a problem in these kind of times, because the rents go up a lot slower, and they may even stabilize in some areas, and you don't get that projected increase.
Well, and that's such a great point, because if you buy a property based on just market appreciation, market will take you higher or not, right. Depending on what the market does. But, having some kind of renovation strategy, maybe forcing the equity upwards by doing renovations within the units, it's a little hedge against that correction that may happen.
And in your bigger cities too, Alex pointed out that rents are going down in the Bay Area. And I've heard that about Los Angeles as well. Your bigger cities that are losing population, like New York City, the Bay Area, Los Angeles, Chicago, rents might be going down because you have so many people leaving, mm-hmm. and you don't have the migration that we're seeing in like Phoenix and Vegas and those markets.
True. And I think, it's all a balance and how the economy, if you've got a lot of inflation in all of those markets, especially those where they have in-migration, it's all going to start to balance out again. I'm hearing from a lot of folks, I listen to a lot of podcasts and economists who talk about how these correct. I mean, New York and a lot of the coastal areas are starting to correct again, mm-hmm. but that out-migration has really hurt them. It's 100% true. You got to follow where those U-Hauls are going.
Exactly.
It's not highly scientific. You just watch the U-Haul numbers.
Right.
They tell you a good story.
Exactly, guys. If people are leaving an area, then yes, you're going to have some rental correction because there's less people. Mm-hmm. And then the places that people are migrating to is where you're going to have rental increases. And that's what we've been seeing, in our market in Phoenix. And it's like you said, it's not rocket science. This is kind of what Ken teaches, is that you want to invest where people are going. So that's one of his big things. And he looks at the U-Hauls, right? He looks at the U-Haul numbers. Where are they going?
For sure. And those U-Hauls will go wherever there is affordability, for sure. But jobs, look at job creation, really do your homework on those markets to know whether you're going to see some increases in migration again as things start to correct.
Yeah, and just because those rents are going down in those bigger cities mm-hmm. doesn't mean people won't go back to those bigger cities. This has happened before where they've left New York and they've come back to New York. It doesn't mean, we don't know when. It could be years, but it will all kind of start to balance out again. It's just right now people are moving to more of where your jobs are, mm-hmm. And the businesses are attracted to the states that are welcoming to them, or the areas that are welcoming to them.
Agree.
So right now we kind of have this tightening. And the Fed is really trying to fight this inflation number, right? But it's a balance between keeping inflation high and putting us into a recession. And I've been following a lot of the big, BlackRock CEO, JP Morgan CEO, they're projecting inflation for a long time, and kind of is as well. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to have inflation. And so they have to keep raising the rates in order to try to combat the inflation. But something interesting that we always talk about in here is I'm not sure they exactly know what they're doing either. They're kind of flying by the seat of their pants too, unfortunately.
Well, it's true. I think, one of the biggest barometers is home sales, home purchases, and where those rates are going for a new home, used home, what have you. And the rates are a direct reflection on that. Mm-hmm. I know rents are going up, but if that starts to ease and, everybody's saying that in a year or two, we'll probably see it go back to more of a normal level. So don't bank on it continuing like it is. But so many people are buying on future value. What you were saying earlier about the future of where you think those rents are going to go, where you think your income's going to go, it's not always going to continue to accelerate. So they're trying to put some downward pressure on these home purchase amounts. And one way to do it is to raise interest rates. It's just a direct reflection.
Yes. And it is... In Phoenix, we deal with our realtor, Elisa, and we love her. And, I had asked her a couple weeks ago, are we seeing a slowing down? And she said inspections are back, meaning people aren't waiving the inspections anymore. But people are still buying cash. And that's the issue, is that there's a lot of cash buyers because of the inflation, because their money's sitting in a bank, losing money every month to inflation. So if they can just go buy a home and it produces some money and it's in a stored asset, that they're safer. And we have a lot of that happening in Phoenix.
It's true. I think what you said about the inspections are back, that due diligence period that typically comes with a refundable deposit. The refundable deposits are starting to become a little less, or a little more few and far between. In addition to that, as these rates are going up, these rate quotes are happening, a lot of folks are retrading their properties that they're in escrow on.
Right.
And successfully. So, you got to balance the two. The interest, you got the cost of debt versus the cost of the property is highly critical. It's a make or break situation.
Absolutely. And Clark makes a good comment. He said cash flow gets more difficult as the interest rate goes up. And that is what we're seeing. So a lot of people at Limitless were saying now's a bad time to buy, right? It's a bad time to buy. And I kept replying to them, no, it's not a bad time to buy. It's a harder time to find a cash flowing deal. So it doesn't mean you want to just sit back, wait, and do nothing. You want to keep looking. It's going to be harder to find something that cash flows, but you can find something that cash flows. And there's always somebody that lists their property for not enough. They don't understand what they're sitting on. Or maybe you have cash and you can negotiate a better deal for their property. Or maybe you can flyer a neighborhood and try to get someone to do like off-market deal. Yeah. And people do these things all the time, you guys. Everyone thinks this is just impossible, and it's hard to find. But if you do your homework, there are absolutely people that don't want to list their house for whatever reason. A lot of times it's a family issue or a privacy issue or maybe a COVID issue where they don't want someone to come into their home, and they're willing to take less for it in order for it to just be a backdoor deal that nobody has to know about.
Well, and yeah, they're watching the news too and hearing about where interest rates are going. So I think they're all, you're going to find more people getting real about what the real true purchase price should be. So it's worth it to keep looking, keep underwriting a deal, and look for that cash flow. There's many ways to find it. And it's not just through renovation, but that cost of debt has to be very, very well underwritten. You have to be very clear about where the interest rates are going to go, especially if you go with something on an adjustable basis.
Right. Yeah. Adjustable rates right now are very risky because obviously things are going up. I had something that was adjustable. I was a credit line, and I fixed the debt about a month ago because I saw the rating on the wall that things are going to really start to accelerate, and I didn't want that adjustable debt. And KSB asked if people are going to start turning to rentals instead of home ownership. And the answer is right now, yes. I mean, people are getting squeezed. Ken talks about the renter nation all the time. And we're heading into a renter nation, which is super normal in most parts of the world. Europe, South America, they don't have a lot of home ownership. The U.S. having such high ownership numbers is unique to the U.S. And so, yeah, we're going to just turn into a lot more renters, but that's why you want to be on the landlord side if you're able to do that.
I agree. And I think there's a lot of renter by choice, not just by necessity. In the age of the folks who are renters, anywhere from 19 to 36 or what have you, they're choosing to rent. They like the amenities. They want the experiences. And typically it costs less to rent than it does to buy. So they'll save that money for experiences more often. So being a landlord, I as with any time in my 30 years in this industry, it's really a great way to invest. It's a safe way to invest because there's a major lack of supply based on population, just the age of our demographics, and now folks wanting to rent versus buy.
Exactly. And you have to think, a lot of people ask, why all of a sudden is there this lack of supply, right? I mean, that's everyone's big question. And truthfully, there's not a lack of supply everywhere. There's a lack of supply where people are migrating to. And that's what we talk about when we talk about, being careful where you choose to invest and looking at migration patterns, right? Because people are kind of migrating south and west. That's what they're generally doing. Mm-hmm. And so you want to invest where people are moving to.
You do. And I think there's a common misnomer that where there's a low amount of supply coming into a market, that's a good thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. It's really likely a barometer of jobs or health of that particular market. But having too many, conversely, can be a major issue. But what is it as a percentage of the full amount of stock in that market? Mm-hmm. So any more than, say, 5% is what I'm hearing. More than 5% of new units coming into an area can throw an imbalance into a market. But if they've got jobs to support it, it really can be measured by the absorption. Like, did occupancy go up? Or did it go down year over year? And what does the number of units look like coming into a particular market? So knowing that or doing that homework when you're looking at properties is something we do. Mm-hmm. But I would highly recommend that to investors who are looking to even buy a single family unit.
Absolutely. And, I always say to people, would you want to live there? Right. So people say, well, I want to buy here, but, if I buy, an hour and a half outside the city or an hour outside the city, it's way cheaper. Yes, it is way cheaper, but would you want to live there? Because it's going to be harder to find a tenant the farther you are from the city center. So yes, it might be $50,000 or $100,000 cheaper, but if you have 4 months of vacancy between every tenant that moves in, and in the other place you have no vacancy or a month of vacancy, you have to factor that in, right? And then what you can get for rent, you're going to get a higher rent closer to the city center, closer to a place someone wanted to live than you're going to be in somewhere somebody doesn't want to live. And you're going to get a different kind of tenant. So it doesn't just come down to this is cheaper, so I should do this. It comes down to you have to factor in all the numbers, and you have to look at in the area, if there isn't a lot of rentals, it's not because you're discovering something that nobody knows about, okay?
Maybe there's no need.
There might not be a need for them. I was talking to my girlfriend, and, she's getting into Airbnb. And they have one in Scottsdale and it's doing great. She goes, I was looking in Michigan and there's hardly any Airbnbs there. I think I'm going to get one right on the lake.
Perfect.
And she goes, look, there's less than 10, And then we had a guy on the show that does Airbnbs, and he goes, you never want to do an Airbnb in a place that doesn't have at least 30 of them, because that means it's not a good spot to do them.
Oh, I'm from Michigan, man. I know. Yeah. It is cold during the way. You're going to be down.
Nobody
for
wants
months.
a lake house when it's freezing outside. So, but it was interesting because, her initial mentality, which I think is a lot of people's initial mentality, is this is inexpensive. there's I can make this work, but just because something's inexpensive, you have to look at the full scale of the numbers.
Well, it's a good point. I was in Montana this summer. We just spent a couple weeks up there, and there's no Airbnbs, hardly any, in this little town called Lewistown, where we went to go see some family. And I was surprised at how much business they were getting. There's a whole lot of new jobs coming to that area. So there's a story. So doing the homework about what's in that particular area can really help with that. The Airbnbs are definitely thriving in that market. Who knew?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, if it's somewhere where people want to visit and want to go or have to go, then it could work. But I want to talk about 2008, right? Because everyone keeps comparing right now to 2008. And I heard that a lot at Limitless, actually, of people saying, well, now's not a good time to buy, and I'm waiting for this big correction. And in 2008, the banks were writing really bad loans, and they were writing them, the subprime loans, and they were balloon loans. So after so long, they were adjustable rate, and the rate would dramatically increase. So people were trying to fire sale those houses in order to get out of that. But now I think it's a little bit different, and I wanted to get your opinion on it, because we have people that have a very low mortgage, and it's a fixed mortgage. So it's, 2.5 to maybe 3%. And those same people have equity in their homes. If we were to go through a recession, it would be cheaper for them to stay in their mortgage than it's going to be to go rent somewhere in most cases. So I don't see this fire sale that people are waiting for, which is what would drop home prices, would be a huge supply hitting the market. Do you see that happening?
I agree with you. I don't feel like it's going to happen, and mainly because there is a major scrutiny post the last recession on lending practices. I mean, I remember folks getting loans just by stating what their income was, and so it's regulations have allowed us to make sure folks are more qualified for their mortgages, and you're right about the low interest rates. If they're fixed, it's way cheaper than any rent out there, if depending on when you bought the property, right?
Right. I mean, the only people that maybe are in maybe a little bit of risk are the people that bought at the higher numbers, but even then, if they were to foreclose on their, it's almost like the asset is the low mortgage. I mean, they have this mortgage that's so much lower than inflation. And I believe people this time around will just make it work, whether it's renting a room out, whether, because if they are going to transition into the rental market is not cheap.
Well, and that's the other thing, because the supply was a little bit of a different balance then. I mean, I remember at the time when this hit, our occupancies weren't at the top in multifamily. So there were all kinds of alternatives. So now with occupancy so high because there's a lack of supply, and our buildings are full to overflowing in many regions. I think that's another piece of this. If they had an alternative, they might give up. I mean, those jingle envelopes that they talked about.
Yes.
Keys.
Did the keys mailing the keys back.
So sad. But I think that people will work out more that way. And with the inflation, it's also meant that a lot of folks' wages have gone up.
They have gone up. And if they're in a fixed rate mortgage, that's beneficial for them.
Agree.
Yeah. And if they're renting, it's not, because rents have also, went up.
Right.
And I feel like this time around too, that the government, they're getting slammed on so many things. I mean, gas prices, grocery prices. And George Gammon made an interesting comment, and he said, people hate inflation except when it comes to their assets, right? So they're pissed that at the grocery store they're paying double, but the fact that their house is doubled, they're thrilled about. So the government doesn't want the market to correct. That's not going to help them. It's not going to look good for them, especially before the primaries and everything.
Agree.
So, they started doing these 40-year mortgages during COVID because we had talked to loan officers that we know, and they basically were letting anybody that was behind refinance into a 40-year mortgage. And I don't know if they're offering them right now. Maybe somebody watching can let us know. But I see that happening again before letting people have a mass foreclosure.
No, I agree. It makes the payment a lot more palatable to folks, so they're able to afford a higher basis with the hope that their personal income can go up, but paid off over a longer period of time. I mean, it's just the math of it. It allows for that, but interest rates are the other thing that's going to help ease that. Whether we like it or not, that I think the Fed's doing it and will continue to do it until they start to see a little bit more balance there.
Yeah, and really, we always talk on the show, but until they start putting it higher than the inflation rate, it's not going to do, it's going to do something, but it's not going to do that much, because you have a lot of people sitting on a lot of money. And if they're losing more in the inflation rate than they would on a mortgage at 5 or 6%, it still makes sense for them to invest in the mortgage.
I agree. And I also heard a talk about how even though the inflation rate, 8.6%, is so much higher than what the Fed is targeted, 2%?
Yes.
Their target's 2%. That's
this transitionary inflation is taking a while.
Huge delta, right? And so between, additional earnings that the general public has been able to bring in and their confidence in you look at the CPI and where it is, the fact that they're spending money still means that there's confidence, and there's a larger share of the amount of money that these folks are earning that goes toward rent. It's one of the great things I love about real estate is the fact that people always need a place to live. So that'll take a top priority. And so the fact that they're still spending tells me they still have some disposable cash. And it allows for us to continue to push on rents while the market's still very, very solid. All of the fundamentals right now are very solid, but we're hedging against that future possibility of rents decelerating or potentially declining, depending on what market you're in, by really focusing on our renewals, where our residents are, what they're paying. And so there's a big gap between where rents are today and what a lot of our customers are locked in at their lease rate, if that makes sense. So bridging that delta has really been important, and we're finding a lot of success with that. It's putting a little downward pressure on occupancy, but not a ton.
So can you explain a couple of things? Can you explain, in 2008, how people made rents work, right? Because I think a lot of people, to your point, it's the main priority. You need a place to live. So what did people do to be able to afford the rents, and what are people doing now to be able to afford the rents?
So one of the things that I remember from 2008 was how surprised I was about how folks would flock to the inner city areas. As rents started to come down in the middle of town, and people wanted to get closer to where their job was, where they were commuting. And so we noticed a lot of folks breaking their leases or needing to downsize and to move to inner city areas so that it was more affordable for them to get to and from work. But we noticed that there were a lot of folks who were willing to take on roommates and move back in with family. And, we worked really hard to mitigate around that. As a company, it spurred our Good Life Promises. Our Good Life Promises were all about how do we help you, maybe you're in a 3-bedroom apartment home, how do we get you into a 2-bedroom or a 1-bedroom if the size fits for the number of people living within your household, but also making payment arrangements with folks. We had to reduce some rents upon renewal. So I think it required for us to be really open to that. But we saw people doing so many things with doubling up, tripling up, going back home. And it delayed a lot of the kids. As if you remember, the population at that point, I think one of the biggest segments of population were those 18 to 36-year-olds that enter the market. They didn't.
Right.
It stalled it.
Well, we're seeing that now. Like a lot of kids are, either instead of living in an apartment while they're in college, they're living with their parents, or even after college, in their 20s, they're moving back home with their parents. And you see people doubling up, tripling up, but we've always seen that in larger markets like the Los Angeles market, the New York market. I remember my friends got married in Los Angeles and they lived with another couple, and that was totally normal because 4 people then could afford a 2-bedroom townhouse. We just haven't seen that in most of the country. So we're just starting to maybe see that a little bit more now that rents are increasing.
Well, and I think one thing that may ease that in this cycle, if we're headed for a recession, which we could be, but I think part of what I'm seeing and hearing is, because people can work from home so much more, that's a really viable option. That I need to be close to my job situation has become less and less of a factor for a lot of our residents who move in. What they're looking for is more, more room to have a home office, and making sure you got the right kind of floor plan. Fits their lifestyle, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think too, people don't want to live too far out because of the gas prices.
Agreed.
So we are kind of seeing that now too, where we were talking to some people at the event, and they were saying some of their more suburban rentals were struggling because people now are trying to move more inward because they're commuting too far. Because some people are bringing people back to the office, or just the amenities in general, a good public transportation system, things like that.
Agree.
So something else I wanted to bring up, and I think this is really important, is, the last 10 years, if you invested with a real estate company or you're an investor yourself, it was really hard to make a bad deal, right? Because everything just kept going up. Rents kept going up, the values kept going up. I mean, it was been a pretty easy stretch, right? And I mean, I'm not saying nobody lost money, because we know a lot of people that have, but it was still, if you semi knew what you were doing, you were good. But now we're kind of getting into a time where you really got to invest with a company, or if it's you really have to understand what you're doing. And we were having a lot of people at the conference ask me a lot about, who should I invest with? What deals should I do? And my answer to them was, whoever you invest with, you have to make sure they know what they're doing, and they've been through a downturn before, because this is uncharted territory for a lot of younger investors. So what would you say to that?
I couldn't agree more. When you go through those cycles, it teaches you how to be resilient. We're fortunate. I mean, MC Company's 22. I've been with the company 22 years. We've been in business 20 years, but our partners have been in business for years. We've seen many cycles, and we've never lost a deal. We've always been able to work it out. The key is really making sure you're buying right, and that it's not based on blue sky that may not continue. You gotta get that right. And if you're not sure, you go to somebody who's been there and has managed through those down cycles. Now is the time for us to be sharpening our tools. Like right now, we're doubling down on customer service and processes, because it's inevitable that those things are going to happen. You got to mitigate vacancy as much as you can. As the market starts to shift, one of the first things that crops up is higher vacancy, and then concessions creep in, and then your income goes down. So getting units done quicker and being ready for everybody that is interested in renting an apartment, you gotta work with an operator who knows how to do that.
Exactly. And I talked to people, I said, you have to buy right and you have to manage right. And if you're investing with somebody that's doing either of those two things wrong, you're not going to be in a good position, as the waters kind of get rougher moving forward.
Yeah, you can't. So here's a telltale sign. One of the things I would look at as an investor, and have looked at as an investor, is what the track record says. So in an up market, it's easy to continue to manage those assets, right? So when the market shifts, is that particular syndicator or group, are they selling to cut their losses? So what's the story of those sales? So we're long-term holders with the idea of exiting our investors' equity through a capital event, refinances, through appreciation of the property through increased NOI. And so if we have to sell a property to get out from underneath it, to try to time it before a recession hits, that'd show up in the track record. So I'd be watching for that. With some folks, if that makes sense.
Very interesting. So basically, to clarify, what you're saying is that before these murky waters kind of start to happen, if you're seeing properties listed, that means that they're possibly
It could be
not being managed well, or they're having some financial issues and they're trying to get out from underneath of them, which isn't great for their investors.
Yeah, maybe they didn't underwrite for the gray sky.
Right.
And so it's really easy to be optimistic in your underwriting, but it's always best to be conservative. And if you haven't been through a cycle, how do you even know what that is, I guess?
Right. And there's a lot of, we were passing, I won't name what it is, but we were passing some units that are under construction in Scottsdale last night. And Ken said, they paid a lot for that land. And I said, I go, do you think it's going to work out? He goes, they paid a lot for that land. So
you have to get really high prices.
Yep. And they're in the middle of building, right? And so as we know, rates are going up, construction's going up, it's taking longer to build, you have delays. So those kind of things are things that if you're going to be in it with somebody, you want to be in it with somebody that knows what they're doing. And Ken was basically saying he feels they overpaid, and we'll see what happens with that.
They got to fix the debt.
So, they got
once they lease up.
Exactly. They have to get it done and then fix the debt. And so it will be interesting to see how some of these projects are going with people that are not as experienced as other people that have been through it.
Agree.
Yeah.
Hopefully their rents will be high enough in such a great location to support that higher debt.
Exactly. But that's where it gets risky, because you're betting on these super high rents. And to your point, we don't know the rental increases, if they're going to be as significant as they've been. And you don't want to bank on it, right? So you want to be very conservative in your numbers. And I want you to touch on how you can't always trust the pro forma, because I think that, when people look at things, like I had a woman showing me a pro forma for something she's looking to invest in. And she goes, well, all these numbers work. And I said, right, if they're all right. So can you kind of touch on that? The pro forma numbers will always work. You'll never find a pro forma number that doesn't work, right? Because then they wouldn't have put it in there.
For sure. Yeah. For sure. It's the broker's job to paint it in the best possible light. And really your job as a real estate investor or somebody who is looking to get involved with a syndicator is to prove that out. Really understand what kind of increase, especially with inflation right now. If it's going up 6.8%, clearly operating costs are going up. Did they underwrite that way? So it's really the broker's job to paint it in the best light. But I've never really relied on those. We underwrite without looking at the OM offering memorandum, that is, and base it on our historical track record so that we can be really clear.
And how would somebody, if they're looking at a pro forma, be able to plug in their verify it?
So there's a couple of ways. I think one of the best things you can get when you get an offering memorandum from a broker, show interest, and sign a confidentiality agreement, you get financials from that particular property owner. So using that data helps to prove it out, but you can't leave it at that. There may be holes in that. So you can get other financials from other properties nearby that you're looking at. Hold on to that data, pool that. Let's say you don't have a portfolio of your own, but the best way is to bring in a third-party management company to help you prove that out. They may charge you to help you do due diligence on a deal, but it's going to pay for itself in the long run to have an expert looking at it.
Absolutely. And I think that's if somebody's telling you, they can get $2,000 a month rent on these rehab units, and there's rehab units down the road and they're getting $1,400 a month for those. And, you got to kind of look at that and say, can they really get that? Right. And you really need to know what their vacancy rate is, down. And it's not a bad idea to go and meet with an apartment down the road that's similar to the one you're looking at investing in. You have to do the hard work, because if you're just going to look at a pro forma and say, yep, this looks good, here you go, that's how you're going to get in trouble.
So true. So true. So shopping all of the competing properties tells you the story. And it's important not to get too emotionally tied to these buildings. If you see something you really want to have, it's hard not to get emotional about the purchase. But you got to be pragmatic. What is an apples for apples comparison? People take into consideration ease of parking and how the floor plan flows, what the condition of the exterior and interior is, but it should be apples for apples, age even. Age, amenity, all of that, and nothing replaces shopping the comps and just asking for a brochure like you're looking for an apartment yourself.
Yeah. And Adrian from YouTube said if the syndicator has only one exit strategy, exit in 3 to 5 years, that's a huge red flag.
Could be.
So that is probably true, right? So, because then what they're banking on is they're banking on appreciation, and they may or may not get that. So if they don't get that, what's their backup strategy?
Right.
So.
What's going to happen?
And Brenda, we will keep you posted. She said keep us posted on the deal Ken was talking about under construction. It'll be a while before we know, but I definitely will keep you updated on how that's going for them. So, we have to do our limitless drawing. Can't forget that. So make sure you hit the like button. It really helps us out. Have 500 people watching, and we need more likes. So this is for a free autograph book by Ken of your choice, and these are from our limitless people. So I will give you a call, but the winner is... Well, this one's blank, so I'm not that person. So the winner is Callie Rojas. So I don't know if you're watching, but I will be reaching out. Ken will sign a book for you of your choice and send it out to you. And thanks, guys. We will see you next week. Hit the like button, and Ken will be back.
Thanks, Danille.
See you, Leslie. Thank you.